Some moments in life divide everything into before and after. For me, it was the sound of knocking at 1 a.m. Desperate, uneven, barely audible through the summer storm that had settled over Savannah that night. I didn't know then that opening my front door would forever change not only my daughter's life, but mine as well. That the bruised face staring back at me would set in motion a sequence of events that would expose the most painful truths about the people we thought we knew. When I saw Emily there, trembling in the rain, her lips split and mascara running down her cheeks like black tears, something primal awoke in me. Something that had been dormant since I hung up my detective badge 15 years ago. She whispered 5 words that ignited a fire inside me I thought had long been extinguished. He beat me for her. The story I'm about to tell isn't one of revenge. It's about dignity, about standing tall when the world expects you to crumble, about facing ugly truths in the bright light of day, where they can no longer hide behind wealth, family names, or polished surfaces. This is how I helped my daughter reclaim her voice, her strength, and her life, one truth at a time. The rain was relentless that night, drumming against my bedroom window like impatient fingers. Sleep had always been elusive for me since retiring from the Savannah Police Department, but that particular evening, something kept me restless, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun lazy circles above my bed. When the knocking came, 3 soft taps barely audible over the storm, I might have dismissed it as a branch against the siding if not for the detective instincts that never quite leave you. Something about the desperate rhythm made my heart quicken as I grabbed my robe. I flipped on the porch light and peered through the peephole, but the figure was hunched over, unrecognizable. With 30 years of police work behind me, I'm no stranger to caution. I slid the chain lock into place before cracking the door open. "Who's there?" I called out. The figure lifted her face, and my world stopped. "Emily?" I whispered, my fingers already fumbling with the chain. "Oh my God, Emily!" My daughter, my beautiful, accomplished 32-year-old daughter, stood shivering on my porch, her cream blouse soaked through and stained with something dark that I immediately recognized wasn't rain. Her right eye was swollen, a bruise already blooming across her cheekbone. Her bottom lip was split, and she held herself as if her ribs hurt. I pulled her inside, every maternal instinct surging through me like electricity. "Who did this to you?" I demanded, though deep down I already knew the answer. "Andrew," she whispered, her voice cracking. "He beat me. For her." I guided her to the kitchen, easing her onto a chair while my hands, steady through countless crime scenes and emergencies, now trembled as I pressed a bag of frozen peas to her face. "For who?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice even. Emily's eyes, so like my own, met mine. "Melanie, from his office." Her breath hitched. "He's been seeing her for months. I confronted him tonight after finding texts. Her voice broke. He just snapped. Rage rose in me like a tide, but I pushed it down. 15 years as a detective had taught me that anger clouds judgment, and right now Emily needed clear thinking more than righteous fury. "We need to document everything," I said, slipping into the procedural mindset that had guided me through my career. "Photos, statement, medical exam." Emily flinched. No, doctors, no police." "Emily, you don't understand," she interrupted, panic flashing across her face. "His family, they practically own this town. His father plays golf with the police commissioner every Sunday. The Fosters, one of Savannah's oldest families. Old money, old connections, old ways of making problems disappear. This isn't about their money or their name," I said firmly. "This is assault. This is criminal." Emily's laugh was hollow, empty of anything resembling humor. "You've been retired too long, Mom. You forgot how it works for people like them." Perhaps she was right. Perhaps I had forgotten how the wealthy insulated themselves, how influence flowed like the Savannah River, quiet but powerful, shaping everything in its path. But I hadn't forgotten how to build a case, piece by meticulous piece. "Then we do this my way," I said. I retrieved my old Nikon from the closet and began documenting every bruise, every cut, as Emily sat silently, tears occasionally slipping down her cheeks. "Tell me everything," I prompted gently, after placing a cup of chamomile tea in front of her. "Start from the beginning." The story unfolded in fragments. Andrew's growing coldness over the past year, the late nights at the office, the password suddenly placed on his phone, the way he criticized her cooking, her clothes, her friends, slowly isolating her from everyone who cared about her. I thought it was me. she admitted, staring into her tea. I thought if I could just be better, more supportive, more understanding, he'd be the man I married again. My chest tightened. I'd watched my vibrant, confident daughter become increasingly withdrawn over the 3 years of her marriage, but I'd attributed it to the natural evolution of a new relationship, the demands of Andrew's position at his father's investment firm. How had I missed the signs? Me, who had spent decades reading people's darkest intentions. When did he first hurt you? I asked, though each word felt like swallowing glass. Emily's silence told me everything. This wasn't the first time, I stated rather than asked. She shook her head almost imperceptibly. Just small things at first. Grabbing my arm too hard, accidentally, pushing past me. Always with an apology after. Always my fault somehow. The classic progression. I'd seen it hundreds of times in my career, yet failed to recognize it. Happening under my nose to my own daughter. Tonight was different, she continued, her voice strengthening slightly. I found messages between him and Melanie. Explicit. Plans to meet. When I confronted him, his eyes just changed, like he became someone else entirely. She touched her bruised cheek gingerly. He said I was worthless, that he only married me because his parents thought I'd be a stabilizing influence, that Melanie understood him in ways I never could. I took her hand across the table, noting the defensive bruising on her forearms, evidence she had raised them to protect herself. And then, I prompted, I said I wanted a divorce. Her voice was barely audible now. That's when he really lost control. I managed to get away when he went for another drink. I just ran. I didn't even grab my purse or phone. The rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows as we sat in silence, the kitchen clock ticking loudly in the background. In that moment, I made a decision. Andrew Foster might have money, connections, and a family name that opened doors throughout Savannah, but I had something more valuable. 30 years of knowing exactly how to build an ironclad case, one that even his father's golf buddies couldn't dismiss. You'll stay here tonight, I said firmly. Tomorrow we start fighting back. Emily's eyes widened with fear. No, Mom. You don't know what he's capable of. I squeezed her hand. Neither does he know what I'm capable of. As I helped her up the stairs to the guest room that had once been her childhood bedroom, I felt a strange calm settling over me. The kind of calm I used to feel before breaking a difficult case wide open. Andrew Foster thought he was untouchable. He was about to learn otherwise. Morning arrived with relentless Georgia sunshine streaming through the blinds, making the previous night feel almost dreamlike, until I heard Emily's muffled sobs from the guest bathroom. The sound snapped me fully awake. The bruises would be darker today, the pain more pronounced. I made coffee and waited. When Emily finally emerged, dressed in old clothes I'd kept in her dresser since college, her attempts to cover the bruising with makeup only emphasized its severity. Sit, I said, placing a plate of scrambled eggs before her. We need to talk strategy. Emily picked at the food listlessly. There's no, strategy, Mom. I can't fight him. I can't fight his family. You don't have to, I replied. Not alone. I pulled out my old leather-bound address book, flipping to the M section. Michael Carter had been the department's most trusted legal advisor during my time on the force. He'd since opened his own practice specializing in domestic violence cases. We're calling Michael, I said, already, reaching for my phone. A lawyer? Emily looked panicked. I can't afford. Michael owes me, I interrupted. I kept his son out of jail after that incident at Forsyth Park. Trust me. As I dialed, I watched Emily's face. The fear was still there, but something else flickered beneath it. A tiny spark of what might have been hope. Michael answered on the third ring. Diana Collins, he said warmly. It's been too long. 20 minutes and one difficult explanation later, we had an appointment for that afternoon. I hung up and turned to Emily. Now for the hard part, I said gently. We need to get you to Savannah Memorial for a medical exam. The flash of terror in her eyes was immediate. The Fosters donated the new emergency wing. Their name is literally on the building, which is why we're going to St. Joseph's instead, I countered. And we're asking specifically for Dr. Rebecca Torres. She worked with me on domestic violence cases for years. She's thorough, discreet, and doesn't give a damn about family names. Emily stared at her untouched eggs. What if it doesn't matter? What if he just gets away with it anyway? I pulled my chair closer, taking both her hands in mine. Listen to me. The system isn't perfect. You're right about that. But I spent my career learning how to make it work anyway. We document everything, build the case methodically, create a record that can't be ignored or dismissed. And if that fails? She whispered. I met her gaze steadily. Then we have plan B, which is, truth has its own power, Emily. Sometimes the court of public opinion can be more effective than any legal system. The drive to St. Joseph's was silent, Emily staring out the window at the Spanish moss draped over oak trees like ancient sentinels. Savannah had always been a city of contradictions. Southern hospitality masking deeply entrenched power structures, beauty concealing decay. Dr. Torres met us personally in a private examination room, her kind eyes missing. Nothing as she assessed Emily's injuries. "I've seen worse," she said matter-of-factly, "but not often from people with Foster as a last name." Emily flinched. "You know who he is?" "I know who all of them are," Dr. Torres replied, gently palpating Emily's ribs. "Doesn't change my job one bit." The examination was thorough and methodical. X-rays confirmed 2 cracked ribs. The split lip would heal, but the bruising around Emily's eye socket was concerning enough for Dr. Torres to order additional scans, just to be safe. Throughout it all, I watched my daughter retreat further into herself with each clinical assessment of her injuries. This was the hardest part, reducing violence to medical terminology, turning pain into evidence. When Dr. Torres finally finished, she handed me a sealed envelope. "Full documentation," she said quietly. "Photos, injury assessment, my professional opinion regarding consistency with reported cause. I've seen enough domestic violence to know it when I see it." I nodded gratefully. "Will you testify if needed?" "Try and stop me," she replied with a grim smile. As we left the hospital, Emily's phone, which I'd retrieved from her house that morning while Andrew was at work, began ringing. His name flashed on the screen. Emily froze, her face draining of color. "You don't have to answer," I reminded her. She stared at the phone for 3 more rings before finally pressing the button. "Hello?" I couldn't hear his words, but I could see their effect. Emily's posture changed, shoulders hunching as if preparing for a blow. Her free hand trembled. "I'm at my mother's," she said, her voice barely audible. Then, after listening, "No, Andrew, I'm not coming home today." A longer pause. "Because I'm afraid of you." The admission seemed to cost her something vital. Tears welled in her eyes. Whatever Andrew said next made her spine stiffen. "The next time you see me," she said with unexpected firmness, "will be either in court or at your parents'. Dinner on Sunday. Your choice." She ended the call and sat motionless, as if shocked by her own courage. "Sunday dinner?" I questioned. "Monthly Foster family tradition," she explained hollowly. "His parents, his sister and her husband, his grandparents sometimes. Everyone pretending we're the perfect family. And you threatened to see him there?" A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "The only thing Andrew fears more than losing control is losing face, especially with his father." I recognized something in that moment, a strategic mind beneath the trauma. My daughter was more than a victim. She was a survivor beginning to find her footing. "Then we have until Sunday," I said, starting the car. Emily looked at me questioningly. "To build a case so strong that even the Fosters can't ignore it," I explained. "By Sunday, Andrew will have told his family some story about where you are, why you're not answering his calls. He'll expect you to fall in line by then, or stay away entirely. And if I don't, then we give him exactly what he fears most," I said, pulling onto the street. The truth, exposed where he can't control the narrative. As we drove toward Michael's office, I could almost feel the weight of what lay ahead. Building a legal case would be challenging enough, but preparing Emily to stand against years of emotional manipulation, helping her reclaim her voice and courage, that would be the true test. Andrew Foster had spent years methodically breaking my daughter down. We had 5 days to help her find her strength again. Michael Carter's office was exactly what you'd expect from a man who'd spent 30 years fighting for justice. Modest, practical, and without pretension. Framed newspaper clippings and legal certifications lined the walls instead of the ostentatious oil paintings that decorated Andrew's family firm. The contrast wasn't lost on Emily as she sank into the worn leather chair across from Michael's desk. "Diana," Michael said warmly, rising to greet us. His hair had gone completely gray since I'd last seen him, but his eyes retained that sharp intelligence I'd always respected. And this must be Emily. I watched as he assessed my daughter's injuries with a quick, professional glance that betrayed nothing but calm concern. "Thank you for seeing us on such short notice," I said. Michael nodded, his expression growing serious. "Diana, Collins never called in favors lightly. If you're here, it matters." He turned to Emily. "I understand you're in a difficult situation with your husband. I need you to tell me everything, even the parts that feel embarrassing or confusing, especially those parts. For the next hour, Emily recounted her marriage to Andrew Foster, the charming courtship, the lavish wedding that had made the society, pages, and the gradual, insidious shift afterward. How Andrew's compliments became criticisms, how his attentiveness transformed into control, how isolated she'd become from friends and even family. When did the physical abuse start? Michael asked gently. Emily stared at her hands. 8 months ago. He grabbed my wrist so hard it bruised when I was late meeting his parents for dinner. He apologized immediately, said he was just stressed about work. She swallowed hard. The incidents got more frequent after that, always followed by apologies, gifts, promises to change. Michael took meticulous notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. I recognized his technique, establishing a timeline, identifying patterns, building a framework for what would eventually become a legal narrative. And you've never reported these incidents before? Emily shook her head. I was ashamed and afraid. The Fosters are influential in Savannah. Andrew's father plays golf with the police commissioner, the mayor. Their family foundation funds half the charitable organizations in town. Money buys influence, Michael acknowledged. But it doesn't put you above the law. Not in my courtroom. He tapped his pen against his legal pad. Here's what we're going to do. First, an emergency restraining order. Then we file for divorce on grounds of cruel treatment. Georgia law works in our favor here. Will a restraining order even be enforced? I asked, voicing the concern I knew was foremost in Emily's mind. Michael's expression hardened. I'll personally see to it that it is. The days when the Fosters could make legal problems disappear are ending. There's been a generational shift in the department. Younger officers, more accountability. He turned to Emily. But I need to be honest with you. This won't be easy. Andrew will likely fight the divorce. His family might try to discredit you, minimize what happened. Are you prepared for that? Emily's gaze dropped to her. Hands again. The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. I don't know, she finally whispered. I don't know if I'm strong enough. You are, I said firmly. You already proved it by leaving, by coming to me. Michael leaned forward. Emily, in my experience, strength isn't about feeling fearless. It's about moving forward despite the fear. Something shifted in Emily's expression, subtle but significant, like a door opening just a crack to let light through. What do I need to do? She asked. Michael outlined the process. The affidavit she would need to sign, the temporary hearing that would follow, the evidence we'd need to gather to support her case. I also recommend we document any communication from Andrew, he added. Don't delete texts or voicemails. Respond unless necessary, and if you do, keep it brief and factual. Emily nodded, some color returning to her face. Having a plan, a structure to follow, seemed to steady her. As we were preparing to leave, Michael pulled me aside while Emily used the restroom. The Fosters will fight dirty, he warned in a low voice. They'll try to paint her as unstable, gold-digging, attention-seeking. You know the playbook. I did know. I'd seen it played out countless times during my career. Powerful men using their resources to rewrite narratives, transform victims into villains. We need more than just Emily's testimony and medical records, I said. We need corroboration, witnesses, anything that substantiates her account. Michael nodded grimly. Start with the people closest to her. Friends, co-workers, anyone who might have noticed changes in her behavior, seen bruises, heard concerning comments from Andrew. Most of her close friends have drifted away, I admitted. Andrew made sure of that. Then we work with what we have, Michael replied pragmatically. And Diana, watch her closely. This kind of trauma, it affects people in unpredictable ways. Courage comes and goes in waves. I understood his meaning. The Emily who had stood up to Andrew on the phone might retreat again when reality fully set in. My job wasn't just to help build a legal case. It was to help rebuild my daughter's sense of self, brick by painful brick. When Emily rejoined us, looking marginally more composed, Michael handed her his card. Day or night, he said firmly. If anything happens, if you feel unsafe for any reason, you call me. On the drive home, Emily stared out the window, arms wrapped protectively around herself. What happens now? She asked quietly. Now we gather evidence, I replied. And you rest. Heal. I should call work, she said suddenly. I'm supposed to be in the office tomorrow. I glanced at her. Emily had built a respectable career as an accountant at a mid-sized firm downtown, another aspect of her life that had gradually diminished under Andrew's influence. "Your health comes first," I reminded her. "I can't hide forever," she countered, a flash of her old determination surfacing. "And I need normalcy. Something that's still mine." I recognized the sentiment. After trauma, routine becomes a lifeline, something predictable in a world suddenly rendered chaotic and threatening. "If you feel up to it," I conceded, "but I'm driving you and picking you up." When we arrived home, Emily went straight upstairs to shower. I took the opportunity to make some calls of my own, starting with Lorraine Banks, my neighbor of 15 years and one of the few people who had consistently seen through the polished veneer of Emily's marriage. I knew something wasn't right, Lorraine confirmed after I explained the situation. The way she'd flinch sometimes when he raised his voice, how she'd check with him before answering simple questions. I tried to ask her about it once, but she shut down completely. "Would you be willing to provide a statement?" I asked. "Document your observations?" "Honey, I'd testify before Congress if it would help that girl," Lorraine replied firmly. "The Fosters may think they own this town, but they don't own the truth." By evening, I had compiled a list of potential witnesses, people who had seen glimpses of Andrew's true nature behind closed doors. The housekeeper who had quit suddenly last year, the bartender at the country club who had observed Andrew's behavior after too many drinks, even Emily's former assistant who had noticed the increasing frequency of accidents that left Emily with bruises she struggled to explain. Each person represented a piece of the puzzle, a fragment of truth that, when assembled, would form an undeniable picture. As night fell, I found Emily sitting on the back porch, staring at the garden I'd meticulously maintained since retirement, my own form of therapy after years of witnessing humanity at its worst. "Do you think it will work?" she asked without turning. "Going against them?" I sat beside her, choosing my words carefully. "I think truth has a power all its own, and I think you're stronger than you realize." She turned to me then, and in the dim porch light, I caught a glimpse of the determined young woman I'd raised, the one who had existed before. Andrew Foster began systematically dismantling her confidence, her identity, her worth. "Sunday terrifies me," she admitted. "That's okay," I said. "Courage isn't about not feeling fear. It's about what you do despite it." Emily nodded slowly, Michael's earlier words seemingly taking root. "One day at a time," she murmured. "One truth at a time," I corrected gently. The next morning, Emily insisted on going to work. I watched her transform herself with makeup, carefully applied to conceal the worst of the bruising, and professional clothing that covered the marks on her arms. The physical mask was impressive, but couldn't hide the wariness in her eyes, the way she carried herself as if expecting a blow. "You don't have to do this today," I reminded her as I drove her downtown. "Yes, I do," she replied, voice stronger than it had been since she appeared on my doorstep. "Every day I hide is a day he wins." I recognized the sentiment. It was something I might have said myself. Perhaps my daughter had inherited more than just my eye color and stubborn chin. When I pulled up outside her office building, she hesitated, hand on the door handle. "I'll be right here at 5, I assured her. "Call me if you need anything. Anything at all." She nodded, squaring her shoulders before stepping out into the bright Savannah morning. I watched her walk into the building, back straight, despite the pain I knew she was feeling, and felt a complicated mixture of pride and concern. My next stop was Emily and Andrew's house, a restored Victorian in one of Savannah's most prestigious neighborhoods, purchased primarily with Foster family money. I knew Andrew would be at work, ensconced in the Foster Investment Group's downtown offices. This was my window. The house key Emily had given me felt heavy in my hand as I let myself in. The interior was immaculate, tastefully decorated in the neutral palette Andrew preferred. Nothing out of place, nothing personal, a showroom more than a home. I moved methodically through the rooms, gathering essentials Emily would need: clothing, personal documents, the jewelry that had belonged to her grandmother. In the master bathroom, I found prescription bottles, sleeping pills, anti-anxiety medication. The dates told a story of increasing dosages over the past year. In the home office, I located Emily's laptop and financial records. Andrew had insisted on managing their finances, but Emily, ever the accountant, had kept her own records. These might prove crucial in the divorce proceedings. As I worked, I couldn't help noticing the subtle signs of violence throughout the otherwise perfect home: a dent in the hallway wall at roughly the height of Emily's head, a crack in the bathroom mirror, a broken picture frame hastily hidden in a desk drawer, the smiling photo of Emily and me from her college graduation inside, glass spiderwebbed directly over her face. Each discovery fueled the cold anger building inside me. This wasn't just about one violent outburst. This was systematic, calculated, a slow erosion of my daughter's spirit that had been happening right under my nose. I was gathering Emily's toiletries when I heard it, the front door opening. I froze, instantly alert, listening to footsteps moving through the foyer. "Emily?" Andrew's voice called out, sounding concerned, solicitous. The voice of a worried husband, not an abuser. "Are you home, sweetheart?" I slipped into the walk-in closet, leaving the door cracked just enough to observe. Andrew Foster appeared in the bedroom doorway, surveying the room with narrowed eyes. At 35, he was conventionally handsome, tall, athletic, with the confident bearing of a man who had never been denied anything. Today, he wore an expression of practiced concern that didn't reach his eyes. "Emily?" he called again, moving toward the bathroom. When he noticed the missing items from her side of the closet, his demeanor changed instantly. The mask of concern dropped, replaced by cold fury. He pulled out his phone and dialed rapidly. "She's not here," he said tersely to whoever answered. "But she's been back. Things are missing." A pause. "No, not valuables. Clothes, personal items." Another pause. "Yes, I checked. The prenup is still in the safe." His voice dropped. "Don't worry, Dad. I'll handle this. She's probably hiding at her mother's house. You know how dramatic she can be." I remained perfectly still, years of surveillance work serving me well. Andrew paced the bedroom, his movements becoming increasingly agitated. "She threatened to come to Sunday dinner," he continued. "Can you imagine? Showing up looking like that, making accusations?" He laughed coldly. "We need to get ahead of this. I've already spoken with Dr. Mercer. He's prepared to provide documentation of her emotional issues." My blood ran cold. Dr. Mercer, the Foster family physician for 3 generations. The same doctor who had prescribed Emily's increasing dosages of anti-anxiety medication. Just make sure everyone understands. Emily's been unstable for months, paranoid, imagining things. The medication makes her confused sometimes. If she does show up, Sunday, we need a united front. As Andrew continued constructing his narrative, I carefully documented every word using the voice recorder app on my phone. This was the real Andrew Foster, calculating, manipulative, already working to discredit Emily. Finally, after one more cursory look around the bedroom, he left. I waited until I heard his car pull away before emerging from my hiding place, hands shaking with suppressed rage. This wasn't just about protecting Emily anymore. This was about exposing a dangerous man who believed his family name placed him above consequences. A man already laying groundwork to paint my daughter as unstable, unreliable, untrustworthy. I finished gathering Emily's belongings quickly, then did something I hadn't planned. I searched Andrew's office, methodically, looking for anything that might prove useful. In his desk drawer, I found a small black book. Inside were phone numbers, each accompanied by a woman's name and cryptic notations. Melanie's name appeared multiple times, but she wasn't the only one. More damning was the checkbook I discovered hidden behind legal volumes on his bookshelf. It documented payments to various women over the past 2 years, always in cash, always noted simply as consultation. The most recent entry, dated just 3 days ago, was for Melanie. I photographed everything, replaced the items exactly as I'd found them, and left the house as carefully as I'd entered it. By the time I picked Emily up from work at 5, I had already shared my discoveries with Michael Carter. "This changes things," Michael said grimly over the phone. "If he's already consulting with Dr. Mercer, he's preparing a mental health defense, trying to undermine Emily's credibility before she even makes an accusation." "Can he do that?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. I'd seen similar tactics throughout my career. "He can try," Michael replied, "but now we know it's coming. And Diana, the recording you made of, Andrew's phone call? Legally complicated. Georgia requires all party consent for recordings. So we can't use it in court," I acknowledged. "Not directly," Michael agreed, "but it tells us where to look, who to interview. And sometimes, information finds its way to the right people through channels that don't involve court filings." I understood his meaning. Sometimes justice requires working around systems built to protect the powerful. When Emily emerged from her office building, I was struck by how composed she appeared, professionally put together, nodding politely to colleagues. Only when she slipped into the passenger seat did the facade crumble. "He called the office," she said, voice trembling. 3 times. Told my assistant he was worried about my mental state. Asked if I seemed stable today. I reached over and squeezed her hand. "I know. He's trying to control the narrative." Her eyes widened. "How do you—" "I went to the house today," I admitted, "to get your things. Andrew came home unexpectedly." Fear flashed across her face. "Did he see you?" "No, but I heard everything. He's already talking to your doctor, Emily, trying to build a case that you're unstable." She leaned back against the headrest, closing her eyes briefly. "Of course he is. That's been his strategy for months now. Whenever I confronted him about anything, he'd say I was being paranoid or over-emotional. He even suggested increasing my anxiety medication when I found lipstick on his collar last month. The systematic nature of the gaslighting made my stomach turn. This wasn't impulsive violence. It was calculated psychological warfare. "We need to move quickly," I said, pulling away from the curb, "before he has time to solidify his version of events." Emily stared out the window at the familiar streets of Savannah, a city now transformed into hostile territory. "Sunday," she said quietly. "Everything changes on Sunday." The next few days passed in a blur of preparations. Emily went to work each morning, determined to maintain some semblance of normalcy, while I coordinated with Michael Carter and continued gathering evidence. Every hour brought us closer to Sunday's confrontation, the day that loomed in our minds like an approaching storm. On Thursday afternoon, I received an unexpected call from Melanie Davis, Andrew's mistress. Michael had reached out to her discreetly, and to my surprise, she agreed to meet. "I'm not doing this for Emily," she said bluntly when we sat down at a quiet cafe 20 miles outside of Savannah. "I'm doing it because what Andrew did to her, he'll eventually do to me, or someone else." Melanie was younger than I expected, mid-20s, with the polished appearance of someone who understood the power of presentation. She twisted her coffee cup nervously as she spoke. "I didn't know he was abusive," she insisted. "Not at first. He told me his marriage was essentially over, that Emily was unstable, controlling." She laughed bitterly. "Classic, right? I believed him because I wanted to." "What changed?" I asked. 2 weeks ago, he got angry when I questioned him about a text from another woman. She pulled up her sleeve, revealing a fading bruise around her wrist. It wasn't as bad as what he did to Emily, but it was enough. I saw something in his eyes that scared me. I nodded, recognizing the pattern. "Will you make a statement?" She hesitated. "My career. I work at his father's firm." "You won't for long once Richard Foster discovers your relationship with his son," I pointed out. "Men, like Andrew, don't keep mistresses. They replace them." Melanie's expression hardened. "I'll make a statement, but I won't testify publicly. That's my limit." It was something, another piece to add to our growing case. But as I drove home, I wondered if it would be enough. The Fosters had generations of influence behind them, a network of powerful connections that could easily dismiss one woman's testimony, or 2, or even 3. When I arrived home, I found Emily sitting on the porch with an unexpected visitor, Sarah Foster, Andrew's sister. "Mrs. Collins," Sarah said, rising as I approached. Unlike her brother, Sarah had always struck me as genuine, uncomfortable with the family's performative perfectionism. "I'm sorry to come unannounced. Sarah came to check on me," Emily explained, her expression a mixture of wariness and hope. I studied Andrew's sister carefully. At 30, she was the intellectual of the family, a professor at the local university rather than another cog in the Foster financial empire. Her relationship with her brother had always seemed strained. "Did your parents send you?" I asked directly. Sarah shook her head. "They don't know I'm here. My mother called this morning, told me Emily was having another episode and wouldn't be at Sunday dinner." She looked at Emily. "When she mentioned Dr. Mercer adjusting your medication, I knew something wasn't right." "What gave it away?" Emily asked quietly. "Andrew's done this before," Sarah replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "His college girlfriend, Heather. She suddenly became unstable too, right? Before graduation. Then there were rumors about an intern at the firm last year." She looked down at her hands. "I've tried to talk to my parents, but they don't want to see it. The Foster name means everything to them." The revelation hung in the air between us. Another pattern established, another link in the chain of evidence. "Will you stand with Emily?" I asked. "If it comes to that." Sarah's hesitation was brief. but noticeable. "I'll tell the truth," she finally said. "Whatever that costs me." After Sarah left, promising to return the next day with documents she thought might help us, Emily and I sat in silence for a long moment. "Do you think she'll really help?" Emily finally asked. "I think she wants to," I replied cautiously. "But family loyalty runs deep, especially in families. Like the Fosters." Emily nodded, understanding the implication. We couldn't count on Sarah's support, not completely, but her visit had shifted something in Emily. Knowing she wasn't Andrew's only victim seemed to strengthen her resolve. "I want to go through with the restraining order," she said suddenly. "Today, if possible." I squeezed her hand. "I'll call Michael." By that evening, the temporary restraining order had been filed and served. Andrew's response was immediate, a barrage of text messages to Emily, alternating between pleas for reconciliation and thinly veiled threats. "He says his father will have the order dismissed by morning," Emily said, showing me her phone. "Let him try," I replied with more confidence than I felt. Every attempt to manipulate the system is another piece of evidence. Friday brought new challenges. Andrew had indeed called in favors, and while the restraining order remained in place, we received notice of an emergency hearing scheduled for Monday, after Sunday's dinner. The timing wasn't coincidental. Andrew was counting on Emily either not showing up at the dinner or being discredited there before the hearing. "He's playing chess," Michael observed when I called him with the news, thinking several moves ahead. "So are we," I reminded him. That afternoon, Dr. Torres called with concerning news. "Someone accessed Emily's medical records yesterday, used Dr. Mercer's credentials." "Can you tell what they were looking for?" I asked, already guessing the answer. "Everything related to anxiety, emotional stability. They also attempted to add notes to her file. Retrospective observations about paranoid tendencies dating back months." Attempted? Hospital policy requires verification for backdated entries. The system flagged it. Dr. Torres's voice hardened. "I've placed a security hold on Emily's records. No one accesses them without my authorization now." Another move in the chess game. Another attempt to construct a false narrative. But this one had failed. And more importantly, left evidence of tampering that Michael assured me would be admissible in court. By Saturday, we had assembled a considerable case. Emily's medical documentation from Dr. Torres, statements from Lorraine and 3 other witnesses who had observed Andrew's controlling behavior, Melanie's limited but damning testimony, evidence of Andrew's other affairs, and Sarah's promise to provide documentation of previous incidents. It wasn't perfect, but it was substantial. "What happens tomorrow?" Emily asked as we sat on the porch Saturday evening, the thick Savannah air heavy with the scent of magnolias. "At the dinner?" "That depends on you," I said honestly. "We could present the evidence privately to Andrew's parents before the dinner, give them a chance to address it within the family." Emily considered this, then shook her head. "Andrew believes his power comes from appearances, from controlling what people see and believe. That's the only language he understands." I nodded, understanding her reasoning. Then we let the truth speak for itself. As night fell over Savannah, I watched my daughter prepare for the next day's confrontation with a quiet dignity that made my chest ache with pride. The bruises on her face had faded to yellowish shadows, but they remained visible, evidence that could not be dismissed or explained away. "Are you afraid?" I asked as she stood in front of the mirror, practicing what she would say. "Terrified," she admitted. "But I keep thinking about what you always told me when I was little." "What's that?" "That courage isn't the absence of fear. It's feeling afraid and doing the right thing anyway." I smiled, recognizing my own words. "Your father used to say that, actually." Emily's eyes met mine in the mirror. "I wish he was here for this." "He is," I said softly. "In you. In that stubborn chin and that straight spine. In the way you refuse to be broken." As we prepared for bed, Emily's phone chimed with a text from Sarah. "Documents secured. We'll bring tomorrow. Be careful. Andrew knows something's happening." Another piece in place. Another step toward justice. But Andrew's awareness meant heightened risk. He wouldn't surrender his carefully constructed image without a fight. "Get some rest," I told Emily, though I knew sleep would elude us both. Tomorrow, truth, has its day. Sunday dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect Savannah day that usually promised garden parties and leisurely brunches. Instead, it brought a palpable tension that seemed to vibrate through my house as Emily and I prepared for the Foster family dinner. "You don't have to do this," I reminded her one last time as she applied makeup, carefully avoiding the still visible bruising. around her eye. Yes, I do, she replied, meeting my gaze in the mirror with newfound resolve. Not just for me, but for Heather, for that intern, for Melanie, for any woman Andrew might hurt next. I nodded, recognizing the shift in her perspective, from victim seeking justice to advocate preventing future harm. It was a transformation I'd seen in survivors before, that moment when personal pain becomes purpose. The Foster family home stood on a tree-lined avenue in Savannah's historic district, a stately Georgian mansion that had belonged to the family for generations. As we approached, I felt Emily tense beside me. "Remember," I said, "we have evidence. We have truth. They have only appearances." Sarah met us at the side entrance, her face taut with anxiety. "Everyone's already here," she whispered, handing Emily a manila envelope. "These are copies of the incident reports from Andrews College. I kept them, just in case." "Thank you," Emily said, tucking the envelope into her purse alongside the other documentation we'd brought. Medical reports, photographs, witness statements. "Andrew's been drinking since noon," Sarah added. "My parents are pretending not to notice." The warning was clear. Andrew would be volatile, unpredictable. I squeezed Emily's hand reassuringly as we followed Sarah through the garden and into the house. Conversation stopped abruptly as we entered the dining room. 12 pairs of eyes turned to stare. Andrew's parents, Richard and Eleanor Foster, his grandparents, his brother-in-law, and several cousins with their spouses. At the head of the table sat Andrew himself, a crystal tumbler of amber liquid in his hand, his expression shifting rapidly from shock to cold fury. "Emily," Eleanor Foster said, her voice brittle with forced pleasantry, "we weren't expecting you." "I'm sorry to disappoint," Emily replied evenly. Richard Foster rose from his seat, ever the patriarchal figure. At 60, he remained imposing, tall, silver-haired, accustomed to commanding rooms and lives with equal authority. "Emily, perhaps this isn't the best time for a visit. Andrew mentioned you've been unwell." "That's one way to put it," Emily said, her voice stronger than I'd heard it in months. She reached up and deliberately wiped away the makeup concealing her bruises. A collective intake of breath circled the room. Eleanor's hand flew to her throat. Andrew's grandfather muttered something under his breath. "What happened to your face?" Richard asked, though his tone suggested he already had a prepared explanation. "Your son happened to my face," Emily stated, her words hanging in the air like glass about to shatter. "And to my ribs and to my arm, because I discovered his affair with Melanie from your office." Andrew slammed his glass down, liquid sloshing over the sides. "She's lying," he snarled. "She's been unstable for months. Ask Dr. Mercer. Ask anyone." "We did ask," I interjected calmly. "We asked Dr. Torres at St. Joseph's, who documented Emily's injuries. We asked Melanie Davis, who confirmed the affair. We asked Lorraine Banks, who witnessed your verbal abuse on multiple occasions." I reached into my bag, removing the folder of evidence we'd compiled. "We also asked your college girlfriend Heather, who experienced similar treatment at your hands 12 years ago." Andrew's face contorted. "This is absurd. You can't just come into my family's home and make these accusations." "They're not accusations," Emily interrupted, her voice trembling but determined. "They're facts. Facts with evidence." She opened the folder and began laying photographs on the dining table. Clinical images of her bruised face, her cracked ribs, the defensive wounds on her arms. Beside them, she placed Dr. Torres's medical report, statements from witnesses, and finally, the documents Sarah had provided detailing incidents from Andrew's past. The room had gone deathly silent. Eleanor Foster stared at the photographs, her perfect composure cracking. Richard's face had hardened into an unreadable mask. The cousins looked anywhere but at the evidence spread before them. "Andrew," Richard finally said, his voice dangerously quiet. "What is this?" "It's nothing," Andrew dismissed, but his confidence was faltering. Emily's always been dramatic. She probably did this to herself. Like Heather did? Sarah spoke up suddenly. "Like that intern last year? Like Melanie's bruised wrist?" Eleanor turned to her daughter, shock evident in her expression. "You knew about this?" "We all knew," Sarah replied, her voice breaking. "We just didn't want to see it." Andrew stood so abruptly his chair toppled backward. "This is a conspiracy," he spat. "Emily's been planning this for months, turning everyone against me. She wants my money, my position." "I don't want anything from you," Emily interrupted, her calm dignity in stark contrast to his raging. except for you to never touch another woman the way you touched me." The simplicity of her statement seemed to catch Andrew off guard. He'd been prepared for accusations, for demands, for threats, but not for this quiet declaration of principle. "I've filed for divorce," Emily continued, addressing Richard and Eleanor directly now, "and for a restraining order, which your son tried to have dismissed using your connections." She gestured to the evidence on the table. "All of this has been submitted to the court for tomorrow's hearing. I'm not here to negotiate or threaten. I'm here because you needed to know the truth about your son before he hurt someone else." Richard Foster looked older suddenly, the weight of undeniable evidence pressing down on his shoulders. Eleanor had begun to weep silently, her perfect makeup tracing dark rivers down her cheeks. Andrew, seeing his parents' reactions, changed tactics immediately. "Mom, Dad, you can't believe this. You know me. I would never—" "Stop." Richard's command cut through the room like a blade. "Sarah, is this true? All of it?" Sarah nodded, tears in her eyes. "I tried to tell you after Heather. You didn't want to hear it." A heavy silence descended on the room. In that moment, I could almost see the carefully constructed facade of Foster family perfection crumbling, years of deliberate blindness giving way to uncomfortable truth. Andrew looked around wildly, sensing his control slipping away. "This is ridiculous. I'm not going to stand here and be accused by my unstable wife and her detective mother." "Ex-wife," Emily corrected quietly. "And I'm not unstable. I'm finally seeing clearly." Richard Foster turned to his son, studying him with new eyes. "Did you do this, Andrew? Did you put your hands on your wife?" Andrew's silence was damning. Eleanor looked up, mascara streaking her face. "Get out," she whispered. "Both of you. I can't look at those photographs anymore." Emily gathered the evidence carefully, returning it to the folder. "I'm sorry it had to be this way," she said, and I could hear genuine regret in her voice, not for exposing Andrew, but for the pain his actions had caused his family. As we turned to leave, Andrew lunged forward suddenly, grabbing Emily's arm. "You'll regret this," he hissed, fingers digging into the same spot that still showed yellowing bruises. Before I could react, Richard Foster moved with surprising speed, pulling his son's hand away. "Enough," he said, voice shaking with barely contained emotion. "You've done enough." The walk back through the garden was silent. It wasn't until we reached the car that Emily finally broke down, tears streaming down her face as the enormity of what had just happened hit her fully. "You did it," I said, holding her close. "You stood your ground. You spoke your truth. What happens now?" she asked, voice muffled against my shoulder. "Now we go to court tomorrow," I replied, with or without the Foster's acknowledgement. But something tells me Richard Foster won't be calling in any favors to help Andrew this time. As we drove away from the mansion, I glanced in the rearview mirror to see Sarah standing on the steps, watching us leave. Her posture suggested both relief and uncertainty, the complicated emotions of someone who had finally spoken a long-held truth, regardless of the consequences. "It's not over," Emily said, following my gaze. "No," I agreed, "but something important changed today. The truth is out now, where everyone can see it, and that's always the first step toward justice." Monday morning dawned with a clarity that matched our purpose as Emily and I prepared for the emergency hearing. The courthouse steps gleamed in the early sunlight, imposing and austere. Emily paused at the bottom, taking a deep breath. "Ready?" I asked, straightening her jacket. A simple navy suit that projected professionalism and dignity. "As I'll ever be," she replied, squaring her shoulders. We'd arrived early, but Michael Carter was already waiting in the designated courtroom, files neatly arranged before him. His confident nod bolstered our spirits as we took our seats. "Any word from the Foster camp?" I asked quietly. Michael shook his head. "Nothing since yesterday. They could still try to delay or dismiss." The courtroom door opened, and we all turned, expecting Andrew and his attorney. Instead, Richard Foster walked in alone, immaculately dressed in a charcoal suit. He scanned the room, spotted us, and approached with measured steps. "Mrs. Collins," he acknowledged me with a slight nod before turning to Emily. "May I speak with you privately for a moment?" Emily glanced at Michael, who raised an eyebrow. "Anything you have to say can be said in front of my attorney," she replied steadily. Richard's jaw tightened, but he conceded with a curt nod. "Very well. I've come to inform you that Andrew will not be contesting the restraining order." The statement hung in the air, surprising in its simplicity. "And the divorce?" Michael asked, ever practical. "He won't contest that either." My son has agreed to a settlement that I believe you'll find more than fair. Richard removed an envelope from his jacket pocket and placed it on the table. The terms are outlined here: full financial disclosure, equitable division of assets, and he hesitated, something like shame flickering across his face. An admission of fault. Emily stared at the envelope but didn't reach for it. Why the change of heart? Richard's expression hardened. After you left yesterday, we had a family discussion. Sarah provided additional evidence that couldn't be ignored. And early this morning, we received a call from Melanie Davis's attorney. I kept my expression neutral, though inwardly I felt a surge of satisfaction. Melanie had clearly decided to fully come forward after all. Andrew is unwell, Richard continued, choosing his words carefully. He's agreed to enter a treatment program for anger management and alcohol dependence. That's not enough, Emily said quietly but firmly. He needs to be held accountable for what he did. Richard met her gaze directly. The settlement includes no opposition to any charges you wish to file. Eleanor and I, he faltered for the first time. We won't be providing legal support if you pursue that path. It was as close to an apology as a man like Richard Foster could offer. The withdrawal of the family's formidable protection, the acknowledgement that Andrew's actions were indefensible. The hearing? Michael inquired, glancing at his watch. I've spoken with Judge Harmon. With your agreement to the settlement terms, today's proceeding can be brief, simply formalizing the restraining order. Michael looked to Emily, who nodded slowly. We'll review the terms, he told Richard, but we appreciate this gesture toward resolution. Richard straightened, adjusting his tie in a gesture that seemed more habit than necessity. There's one more thing, he said, addressing Emily directly. Sarah told us about your position at Daniel's Accounting. If you're looking for a change, Eleanor serves on the board of the Savannah Women's Foundation. They're seeking a financial director. Your name would have her full endorsement. The offer surprised me. A tangible acknowledgement of the family's responsibility, a concrete step toward making amends. Emily's expression remained carefully neutral. Thank you. I'll consider it. With a final nod, Richard turned to leave, then paused. My wife asked me to tell you. She's sorry she didn't see what was happening. We both are. After he departed, Emily, Michael, and I sat in stunned silence for a moment. Well, Michael finally said, that was unexpected. Is it real? Emily asked, staring at the envelope containing the settlement offer. Or just another attempt to manage appearances? I considered this. Probably both, I admitted. The Fosters cared deeply about their reputation. But Richard's offer to withdraw legal support if you press charges, that's significant. Michael opened the envelope, scanning the documents with professional scrutiny. This is comprehensive, he confirmed. Full financial disclosure, very generous division of assets, clear admission of fault, and no confidentiality clause. They're not trying to buy your silence. As predicted, the hearing itself was brief. Judge Harmon, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, reviewed the agreed-upon restraining order and the settlement framework. Andrew was conspicuously absent, represented only by his attorney who offered no objections. The court grants the petitioner's request for a protective order, Judge Harmon declared, fixing Andrew's attorney with a stern gaze. Ensure your client understands the consequences of any violation. As we exited the courtroom into the bright midday sun, I watched Emily's expression carefully. There was relief there, certainly, but something else too, a thoughtfulness that suggested internal processing. How do you feel? I asked as we walked down the courthouse steps. Strangely, empty, she admitted. I thought I'd feel victorious or vindicated. Instead, I just feel done. I understood completely. The aftermath of trauma and conflict often brings this hollowed-out sensation, relief intermingled with exhaustion, the body and mind finally acknowledging what they've endured now that the immediate danger has passed. That's normal, I assured her. The emotional processing comes later, when it's safe to feel again. Michael shook our hands at the bottom of the steps. I'll review the complete settlement package and be in touch tomorrow. But Emily, he added with rare warmth, you should be proud of yourself. Standing up to power like this takes extraordinary courage. As we drove home through Savannah's oak-lined streets, Emily gazed out the window, lost in thought. I'm not going to press charges, she finally said. I glanced at her, surprised. Are you sure? You have every right to— I know, she interrupted gently. But a trial would mean reliving everything, again and again. I want to move forward, not stay trapped in what he did to me. I nodded, understanding her choice. Justice takes many forms, and sometimes the most healing path isn't the most punitive one. And the job offer? I asked. A small smile touched her lips, the first genuine one I'd seen in days. I think I might consider it. Not immediately, but eventually. Using my skills to help women in need seems like the right kind of symmetry. As we pulled into my driveway, Emily looked at the house, the place that had become her refuge in crisis, now transforming into a way station on her journey towards something new. I'm thinking about that apartment on Broughton Street, she said. The one above the bookstore. It gets good light for plants. The casual mention of future plans, a place of her own, living things to nurture, filled me with quiet joy. This was healing. Beginning the first tentative steps toward reclaiming not just safety, but possibilities. It's a good location, I agreed. Close enough for Sunday dinners, far enough for independence. Emily reached over and squeezed my hand. Thank you, Mom, for believing me, for fighting with me, for showing me how to be strong when I forgot. As we entered the house together, I realized something profound had shifted. The worst was behind us now. What lay ahead was the gradual, imperfect process of rebuilding. Not the life Emily had before, but something new, something chosen rather than endured. And in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that she would be okay. Not immediately, not perfectly, but ultimately and completely. The truth had done its work, bringing both pain and liberation. The rest was just time and healing. 3 months passed with the gentle persistence that time brings after upheaval. Summer gave way to fall, painting Savannah's squares with amber and gold. I watched the transformation from my porch, much as I watched the transformation in my daughter. Gradual, beautiful, a reminder that change is the only constant we can truly count on. Emily moved into the Broughton Street apartment in August, filling the space with plants and books and carefully chosen artwork. It was a sanctuary of her own creation, bearing no resemblance to the museum-like perfection of the home she'd shared with Andrew. Here, coffee mugs could be left on side tables, shoes kicked off by the sofa, windows thrown open to welcome the evening breeze. Here, she answered to no one's aesthetic, but her own. The divorce was finalized with surprising efficiency, thanks in part to Richard Foster's behind-the-scenes influence. True to his word, he ensured Andrew offered no resistance. The settlement provided Emily with financial security without tying her permanently to the Foster fortune, a clean break that allowed her to stand on her own terms. Andrew himself had disappeared from Savannah's social circles, reportedly checking into an exclusive rehabilitation facility in Arizona. Sarah, who still met Emily for coffee every other week, confided that her brother's absence had been carefully managed, a stress-related health retreat, according to the official family narrative. The truth circulated through whispers and sideways glances at country club luncheons, as truth often does in small cities with long memories. In September, Emily accepted the position at the Savannah Women's Foundation, where her financial expertise quickly proved invaluable. The work suited her, purposeful, challenging, surrounded by people who valued substance over appearance. She began building a new social circle, forming friendships based on genuine connection rather than social obligation. I watched this rebirth with a mother's pride, offering support when asked but consciously stepping back, allowing Emily to rediscover her independence, her voice, her boundaries. Our Sunday dinners remained sacred, a touchstone of continuity in a sea of change. But between those gatherings, Emily charted her own course. On a crisp October evening, as maple leaves drifted onto my porch like copper pennies, my phone rang. It was Dr. Torres. "Diana," she said without preamble, "I thought you should know. A woman came into the ER today, Jennifer Winters. She works at Foster Investment Group." My breath caught. Andrew? Back in town, apparently. Not as rehabilitated as the family might hope. Dr. Torres's voice was grim. Jennifer's injuries were similar to Emily's, though less severe. When I mentioned the pattern, she broke down and confirmed it was Andrew Foster. Is she willing to report it? That's why I'm calling. She was terrified of not being believed, of losing her job. I mentioned you and Emily, how you stood up to the Fosters. She asked if she could talk to you both. I hesitated, uncertain how Emily would react to being pulled back into Andrew's orbit, even peripherally. Let me speak with Emily first. When I called my daughter, her response surprised me. "Give her my number," she said without hesitation. "She needs to know she's not alone." The next day, Jennifer Winters sat in Emily's sunny apartment, hands wrapped around a mug of tea. tearfully recounting her brief relationship with Andrew, who had returned to Savannah 2 weeks earlier. "He was so charming at first," she said, echoing Emily's own words from months before. "Then he started drinking one night, and when I disagreed with him about something so trivial, a restaurant choice, he just snapped." Emily listened with quiet compassion, offering neither judgment nor platitudes, simply the understanding that only shared experience can provide. When Jennifer expressed fear about reporting Andrew, about challenging the Foster family's power, Emily reached for a folder on her bookshelf. "This is everything we documented," she explained, showing Jennifer the methodical evidence we'd gathered. "The medical reports, the witness statements, the pattern of behavior. And this," she added, pulling out a business card, "is Michael Carter. He'll help you navigate the legal process." "Did you press charges?" Jennifer asked. Emily shook her head. "I chose a different path, but that was my decision. For my healing. You need to choose what's right for you." After Jennifer left, armed with resources and the knowledge that she wasn't fighting alone, Emily and I sat in her living room, surrounded by the plants that had flourished under her care these past months. "She's the fourth," Emily said quietly. Looked at her questioningly. "The fourth woman we know of that Andrew has hurt," she clarified. "Me, Heather, the intern, and now Jennifer. How many more might there be?" The question hung between us, impossible to answer yet important to ask. Andrew's pattern was clear, his rehabilitation evidently superficial at best. "What do we do?" I asked, already knowing Emily would have considered this deeply. She met my gaze, her eyes clear and determined. "We create a resource, a documented history of Andrew's behavior, a support network for anyone who comes forward, legal guidance, counseling options. Not public, that would just trigger lawsuits from the Fosters, but accessible to those who need it." It was a solution that balanced justice with practicality, advocacy with self-protection. Typically Emily in its thoughtfulness. "I'll help," I promised. "Michael will too, I'm sure." Emily nodded, then rose and moved to the window, looking out at Savannah's historic streets as twilight painted them in soft purples and blues. "I used to think strength meant never breaking," she said reflectively. "Now I understand it's about how you reassemble the pieces." I joined her at the window, noting how the city looked different from this vantage point, her vantage point, offering new perspectives on familiar landscapes. "There's a Japanese art form called kintsugi," I told her. "When pottery breaks, artisans repair it with gold, highlighting the fractures instead of hiding them. The philosophy behind it is that something becomes more beautiful, more valuable for having been broken and repaired." Emily smiled, a full, genuine expression that reached her eyes. "I like that. Wearing your history honestly, finding beauty in resilience." In that moment, looking at my daughter, standing tall in an apartment of her own creation, using her pain to help others, facing the future with clear eyes, I saw the embodiment of that philosophy. The breaks were still visible if you knew where to look, but they had been filled with something precious: truth, courage, compassion, wisdom, hard-won. 2 days later, Jennifer Winters filed a police report against Andrew Foster. This time, there were no calls from Richard to the police commissioner, no family influence smoothing the way. The Foster family, it seemed, had finally recognized a truth too painful to acknowledge before. Their son was dangerous to women, and their protection had only enabled his behavior. Andrew was arrested the following week. The news made small waves in Savannah society, notable but not shocking, as the whispers had prepared the ground. When reporters called Emily for comment, she offered only, "I hope Jennifer receives the justice and support she deserves, and I hope Andrew finds the help he genuinely needs." Her grace in that moment, the absence of vindictiveness, the presence of compassion without compromise, confirmed what I already knew. Emily hadn't just survived. She had transformed. The woman who had appeared broken on my doorstep 3 months ago now stood whole, not despite her fractures, but because of how she had mended them. On our last Sunday dinner before Thanksgiving, as we shared pumpkin pie on my porch, Emily raised her coffee cup in a small toast. "To truth," she said simply, "for setting us free." I clinked my cup against hers, adding, "and to the strength of broken things." Around us, Savannah prepared for evening, streetlights illuminating the Spanish moss like silver ribbons. Life continued its imperfect, beautiful unfolding. And we, witnesses to both darkness and dawn, continued too, carrying our truths, wearing our gold-filled fractures with dignity. The story wasn't over, of course. Stories like these never truly end. But the worst chapters had been written, their lessons absorbed. What remained were blank pages waiting for new words, new beginnings. And Emily, I knew with certainty, would fill them with a hand steady enough to acknowledge the past, yet free enough to create a future entirely her own.